Tax cuts for the wealthy have long drawn support from conservative lawmakers, writes a fascinating piece for CBS News by Amy Peachy. You know, this has been the pitch ever since Reagan. It was also the pitch in 1920 by Warren Harding. Warren Harding was the Republican who was elected after Woodrow Wilson, after the Democrat Woodrow Wilson, after the end of World War I, and you know, on the tail end of the flu pandemic. And Warren Harding, you know, went out of his way. You know, when he came into office, the top tax rate was 74%. And he went out of his way to drop it down to 25%. It took him 2 years to do it, but he did it. Saying that it would make everybody wealthy. And the theory that he used was, now keep in mind, back then, probably a third of the streets in America in 1920 or 21 were still dirt roads, and there were people still riding horses. It was becoming less and less common. I mean, the car had become a thing, really, in the 1890s and early 19-teens. But you know, there was still a lot of people, everybody, certainly within the memory, the living memory of everybody, was, you know, how horses worked and how they, you know, pooped on the streets, essentially. So Warren Harding's argument was what he called the horses and sparrow theory, which is that if you feed horses extra oats, more than they normally could digest, they pass through into their horse patties undigested oats. And the sparrows, little tiny birds, come out and eat those oats. So you're basically feeding the sparrows by overfeeding the horses. And the logic was that if we help the rich get even richer, they will trickle that money down or poop that money out or whatever to the poor people, the sparrows. When Reagan came along and tried this in 1981, he had a different metaphor. It was the trickle-down theory that if you overfill, you know, a wine glass, some of that wine is going to trickle down onto the table and eventually onto the floor, and it's going to get all over your shoes, and you're going to have more wine, I guess, or something like that. I don't know, but you know, this has been their sales pitch. And so they've been doing this for 50 years. I mean, you know, from Australia to England to the United States, they've looked at this. These two economists, David Hope and Julian Lindbergh of the King's College London School of Economics. And they looked at tax breaks for the rich during this 50-year period from 1965 to 2015. And they compared the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom. All three countries embraced neoliberalism in the late 60s and throughout the 70s. You know, we were heavier in the 70s. And what they found was that, quote, based on our research, we would argue that the economic rationale for keeping taxes on the rich low is weak. In fact, if we look back into history, the period of the highest taxes on the rich was also a period with high economic growth and low unemployment. Now, the analysis ends in 2015, so they don't have an opportunity to look at Trump's tax cuts. But, you know, we can just look at Trump's tax cuts right now and see that, you know, basically they didn't help. You know, they didn't do anything. So enough, right? Enough already. And I think people are waking up to it. You know, it was the horse and sparrow theory was pitched in 1921, and you had the massive, the Republican Great Depression was kicked off in October of 1929 with the massive stock market crash. And by 1932, everybody had figured out this is BS. You know, this whole horses and sparrow thing doesn't make any sense. Why not just feed the sparrows, right? Why not just pay decent wages to people, or make the government the employer of last resort? And with regard to, you know, housing, I would say why not make the government the houser of last resort? I mean, there are some things that are pretty much essential to function in our society. You have to have housing, you have to have food, you have to have you know, a reasonable level of heat and air conditioning, depending on where you live in the country. And you need health care. And you know, and let's just like change the rules around these things that are essentially part of the commons, these things that are fundamental to all of our life. So anyhow, CBS's Money Watch just kind of blew this one apart. 50 years of tax cuts for the rich have failed to trickle down, is essentially the headline.